Performance Testing for Beginners, Part 5. Some of the basic questions that we can ask during the requirement gathering phase are: what is the purpose of the system? Details of high-level activities that the users can perform on this application. How often each activity is performed? Which activity is frequently used and are they resource intensive? Hardware and software architecture, production architecture. If the application is already in production, what are the current response times and throughput? Are there any requirements for the data preparation? What is the desired norms for the resource utilization? What is the available percentage of test environment for carrying out our performance testing activities? Over this screen, we will try to know where we can get the information that we needed for our requirement gathering. Though we do not perform any functional testing, we should have thorough knowledge about the application that we are going to test. So we can contact the following people for having the necessary details about the application that we are going to test. It can either be the client or the stakeholders, project managers, technical or application architects, business analysts, or from the documentations like user guide, technical design, etc. Now let us see more about performance test plan and its contents. Project description. It has details about the project introduction and details regarding like how it is going to benefit the end users. Project scope. Since we are submitting this test plan for client approval, we would be including our in-scope items and out-of-scope items in this list. Entry criteria. Before we start any of our testing activities, we make an agreement with the project manager on some critical items such as all found defects during the system testing phase has to be fixed and retested. Code freeze is to be in place for the application and configuration is frozen. The test environments are ready. Master data has been created and verified. No activities outside performance testing and monitoring will occur during the agreed time period. So all these items will fall under the entry criteria. For the exit criteria, we have few pointers like all planned performance tests have to be performed. The performance test passes all stated objectives at the maximum number of users specified. The application overview gives a description about the business purpose of the web application. This may include some marketing data, stating estimates, or historical revenue produced by the web application. The architecture overview contains the details about the current architecture that we have for our application. Performance testing process includes the description of user scenarios, the performance testing tool that we will be using for injecting the load, user ratios and think times, ramp up and ramp down pattern. The test environment includes details about testbed that describes more about test environment to be used and its availability. Network infrastructure contains details about the network topology. Hardware resource contains details about memory, processor, environment, and test data details such as database size and other test data requirements. Under the key stakeholders and their responsibilities, we have a list of people who would be helping us whenever we need some information or if we are blocked with some activity. For example, if we are having a development issue, we would be having a developer lead details whom we need to contact for fixing that bug on a priority so that there will be no impact on our performance testing. Project schedule. This contains the timelines that we have for performance testing, and it is given in different formats. Risks and dependencies. This is an important concept in performance test plan. In this section, we would be updating the risks that we have for completing our testing and the dependencies that we have. Say for example, the test data needs to be prepared and be in place for performance testing. So all these kind of risks and dependencies that we foresee for completing the project are mentioned here, so that the project manager and other stakeholders can look at it and complete them, so that there will be no blockers for performance testing team to carry out their activities. Status reporting process. Under this section, we would be mentioning, like after completing each load test, what is the result format that we are going to share and whom we are sharing this report with, and whose approval is needed for closing the test results. So all these details would be mentioning under the status reporting process. A performance testing script consists of correlations, parameterization, transactions, range point, and verification checks. Correlation is done to resolve dynamic server values such as session ID or cookies. Most of the commercial performance testing tools support both manual and automatic correlations. Parameterization is done to provide each user with unique or specific value for applications. Depending on the parameter type that is set in our scripts, the values are dynamically provided by the tool to each virtual user in order to perform the real load test. Transactions are defined to measure the performance of the server. Each transaction measures the response it takes for the server to respond to a specific virtual user request. Range point. They are used to synchronize virtual users to perform a task at the exact same moment to emulate heavy user load. When a virtual user arrives at a range point, it is held by the controller until all virtual users participating in the range reach that point. Verification point like text check and image check are used to make sure that the script is successfully navigating throughout the workflow. If an error occurs in between, through these verification points, we could know exactly where the script is failing. Test checks are usually done in most of the web application scripts, whereas image checks are added to the script where the end user decides whether to buy or not to buy a product by looking at the images. For example, Amazon.com. Before proceeding with the performance test execution, ensure that the test system is up and running. You can check this by manually triggering the launch URL of the application. Check if all the test data required for completing our test is in place or not. Check if the system configuration is as per the plan. In case if you are not aware of this, please check with the middleware team for confirmation. Perform a smoke test to ensure that the scripts are working fine. Check if the scenario scheduling is correct with the accurate ramp up and ramp downs. Ensure if the schedule is correct to groups and if the number of virtual users for each group is correct for the test run. Double check if the monitoring tools or utilities are ready to collect the performance data. Lastly, always ensure that the debugging statements in the scripts are commented and logging is done only when necessary. This will avoid unnecessary piling up of log file and sometimes crashes our load test if it is planned to run with huge number of users and for longer duration. Performance test metrics collection. As performance testers, we should not only concentrate on the application response time, but we should also keep a watch on the metrics during the test run. Depending on the project, we may or may not get an application performance monitoring tool such as App Insights, App Dynamics, or Dynatrace. If the project does not have the required budget to invest in the application monitoring tools, we may need to do the monitoring the manual way using Perfman, system commands, etc. For the client-side metrics, we should mainly concentrate on response time and throughput provided by the test tool. For server-side metrics, we would mainly rely on Perfman for Windows, system commands for Linux or Unix, free test monitoring tools, JMX counters, application server logs, database server logs, and web server logs. Performance test result analysis. Always remember that with respect to the response time, the lesser time it takes, the better it is for the application performance. With respect to the throughput, it is always better to have their numbers on the higher side. As you could see on the below screen, throughput increases as load increases and reaches a saturation point, beyond which any further load increase will also increase the response time exponentially. This is called the knee point or the application saturation point. Performance test result analysis. User load versus CPU utilization should always be linear. If 100% CPU usage is reached even before the expected user load, then CPU is the bottleneck. To overcome this issue, do a quick check by increasing the number of CPUs or by using a faster CPU. Also check for some context switches on processor queue length. If 100% CPU usage is not reached, then check for bottlenecks in other system resources. Load versus disk input and output. Check for average disk queue length and current disk queue length. Check for percentage disk time. Also check for disk transfers per second and see if you can find any issues. Memory utilization versus time. Check for available memory and amount of swapping. Memory usage should get stabilized after some time into the test. If memory usage increases with each test run for each iteration of an activity for the same amount of users and does not come out, then it could be a possible indication of memory leak. For network utilization, keep a check on current bandwidth, packets per second, packets lost per second. Performance test report creation. It is the end deliverable of performance testing and is very important from stakeholders' point of view, as their decision to go live or not to go depends on our test results. It should reflect the performance test objective. Always ensure to provide the test results in a tabular format and add the relevant graphs to it. Include a note of all the issues faced during the testing. Document all the findings and observations. Load and especially stress tests would sometimes reflect the bad side of an application. So when it throws error, capture all of them for future analysis. Share the recommendations to fix it and rerun the test again to see if it is still throwing errors or if it is fixed. Any deviations or workarounds should be mentioned in the test report. Conclusion should be substantiated with proper analysis. The test result report should contain executive summary, test objective, test results summary, conclusions and recommendations, test environment setup, software configuration used including major and minor versions wherever applicable, hardware configuration, business flows or test scenarios tested, test run information including observations, test results in tabular format and their relevant graphs, conclusion and recommendations.